A series of hard-fought battles within the Conservative Party had seen John Major's government only survive a vote of no confidence on the issue of the ratification of the Maastricht Treaty by a single vote, with both sides pulling out all the stops to ensure every available MP was there. With the vote tied at 317 each, the Speaker of the House, Betty Boothroyd, had the casting vote and, as per tradition, cast it for the government's side. With the Maastricht rebels, who had voted against Major's government, now suspended from the party and the treaty due to be formally ratified in November, those who opposed the closer integration of Europe now changed their mission from opposing Maastricht to withdrawing the UK from the European Union entirely. In early September, the tiny Anti-Federalist League party, founded in 1991 by Alan Sked, a member of the Eurosceptic think tank the Bruges Group, renamed itself the UK Independence Party, deliberately avoiding using the word British in its name to avoid confusion with the far-right British National Party. The BNP in turn were gaining support as the economy continued to drag itself oh so slowly out of the early 90s recession. In the week after the Italian Grand Prix, the news came out that unemployment was up again for the second month running, and the day after that, the British National Party gained its first ever elected representative, winning control of Tower Hamlets Control in Millwall, East London, running on the platform of Rights for Whites. It was incredibly close, though. Of 4,371 votes cast, the BNP won the seat by 7. Over in the US, the weekly magazine Computer World published a 3-page article titled Doomsday 2000 by the Canadian software engineer Peter DeJager. In it, he documented something that might cause a problem in a few years' time. Many of the world's computer systems stored the year as 2 digits instead of 4, a legacy of the days when memory was expensive and programmers had to use as little of it as possible. So when the year 1999 rolled around to 2000, many computers would simply change from 99 to 00 and would be unable to distinguish 2000 from 1900. Nobody was quite sure what would happen, but most experts agreed that it would probably be bad. DeJager hadn't been the first to raise the issue. A 1984 book entitled Computers in Crisis had been an early outrider, but the article in Computer World was one of the first times it came to wider notice, with the New York Times comparing it to the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Following on from Power Rangers the previous weeks, the more iconic shows debuted on kids' TV in the late summer of 1993, with Bill Nye the Science Guy getting its debut in syndication following a couple of limited-release pilots, an anthology show Animaniacs, which followed in the footsteps of the recently ended Tiny Toon Adventures in producing a new take on the classic slapstick cartoons of the 30s, 40s and 50s. Hands Up, who still uses Wacko's America and the President's Song to remember the US state capitals and presidents, respectively. And on the day after the Monza race, a significant handshake took place at the White House, as Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO leader Yasser Arafat marked the sealing of the first Oslo Accord, which attempted to at least begin to resolve the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. The Palestinians would gain a measure of self-government under the new Palestinian National Authority, while Israel would withdraw its troops from parts of the Gaza Strip and West Bank. Both sides agreed to renounce violence, Palestine would hold elections, and after 5 years they'd all reconvene to see how things were going and move on to the next step. Obviously, from the perspective of 2025, I think we all know that this did not in fact resolve once and for all the ongoing conflict, and this remains an incredibly hot and divisive topic. The comments on a YouTube video about a Formula 1 race are not the place to discuss this, and just keep it to yourself. Same goes for the UKIP and Brexit stuff. I'm not going to lock the comments because there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about in the rest of the video, but I am going to be using the mod tool that allows me to screen them before publication, just for this video. So if you don't see your completely innocuous comment immediately, that's why. Lexington, Ohio was the scene of what could be the decisive race of the 1993 PPG IndyCar season, with Emerson Fittipaldi needing a win to keep his hopes alive after a rough series of races. Mansell was on pole alongside Tracy, with Fittipaldi and Boesel behind, and the Canadian got ahead at the start as Mike Grove was nudged into a spin, meaning the cameras didn't see Mansell and Tracy collide, deranging the Newman-Haas's steering and knocking loose a bit of front wing that came off as Mansell fell back. A quick repair and Mansell shot back out of the pits, only to find himself emerging right in front of the pace car, which meant another 10-second stop-go penalty. Tracy's car had been undamaged in the early incident, but it ended up not mattering as he tripped over Scott Pruitt on lap 21 and went into the tyre wall hard, ending what slim title hopes he had had. All of which put Fittipaldi in the lead, and needing a win, and ideally for Mansell not to recover too much. Scott Goodyear, Little Al Unser and Bo Hazel were pushing hard at each other and MO2, but the double F1 champion was able to pull away as the others fought amongst themselves. In the end, it was Robbie Gordon who came through to take second as MO took his much-needed win by 16 seconds, followed by Goodyear third and Bo Hazel fourth, while Mansell could do no better than 12th. The Brits' lead was thus cut to 14 points, and with 44 points still on offer in the remaining two races at Nazareth and Laguna Seca, it was all to play for. Nazareth was famously the home of the Andretti family, and while Mario was hoping to do well and revive his flagging season a bit, young Michael headed to Italy for what would likely be his last race in F1 for 1993 at least. Just before leaving Pennsylvania on September the 7th, Michael sent Ron Dennis a letter of resignation, and the respective sets of lawyers got in touch, though nothing was made public at this stage. Fortunately, Mika Häkkinen was waiting in the wings to take over the number 7 McLaren, because Ron had other issues to deal with. He was still looking for an engine for 1994. Peugeot, whose entry as an engine supplier was an open secret by this point, and Lamborghini were the prime candidates, with Ron apparently preferring the latter as more of a known quantity. But there were politics afoot, as parent company Chrysler wanted to sell the brand but keep the engineering division that made the F1 engines, so Ron insisted on only talking directly to Chrysler in Detroit rather than dealing with Lamborghini president Tim Adams or his deputy Daniele Audetto. Nonetheless, he clearly thought there was some future in it, as the Woking factory produced a chassis modified to mount one of the latest Lamborghini V12 engines, that should be in the back of the LaRousse car except they hadn't paid their bills, and it was due to be given a run out after Monza. Monza was traditionally the scene for both wild speculation and a flurry of press releases and announcements as the European season began wrapping up, and pieces were put in place for the following year, and 1993 was certainly no exception. The French motoring paper Auto Hebdo was reporting that LaRousse Peugeot was a done deal for 1994, with free manufacture of V10s, leading to a complete takeover of the team as a new Peugeot Works team in the future. But the reporting was premature. While Gerard LaRousse was all for it, Peugeot bosses were less keen on acquiring a sinking ship of a team and would prefer a customer arrangement with a top team, meaning McLaren. So Peugeot man Jean-Pierre Jabouille, an old friend of Gerard LaRousse, was told to direct his efforts in that direction instead. News for Lotus too, as the Mugen operation announced that following disappointing results for footwork in 1993, they would be switching to supply the Norfolk-based team for 1994, a deal helped by Lotus's sponsorship from Hitachi. For their part, Peter Collins announced that Alessandro Zanardi would be rested following his accident to fully recover, and Portuguese driver Pedro Lamy would take his place for the remainder of 1993. Lamy was highly touted as a future star, and maybe more relevantly came with big sponsorship from the Portuguese oil firm Galp, to which Castrol agreed to turn a blind eye. All of which rather cut Footwork's promise off at the knees, with no engine, no active suspension for next year, and now no drivers, as Aguri Suzuki had come in with the Mugen deal, and Derek Warwick at 39 decided he wasn't in the market for rebuilding a team from the ground up, and with another top driver unlikely to be forthcoming, he was retiring from F1 for good this time at the end of the year. Jackie Oliver had offered Paul Stewart a test at Silverstone in the hopes of wooing Ford, with whom both Paul and Jackie had close ties, to take over from McLaren or Benetton if either or both got a new engine deal for next year. Over at Jordan, Thierry Boutson's retirement had likewise provided Eddie Jordan with an opportunity to refill his coffers a little, and he offered 28-year-old Italian Marco Apicella a debut on a one-race deal in exchange for a big wad of cash just a week before his wedding. He'd be hoping for a good present. Jordan test driver Emanuele Naspetti had reportedly been offered the drive and did have some Grand Prix experience, but apparently declined. Car number 11, Pedro Lamy. José Pedro Mourão Nunes Lamy Viçoso was born not far from Estoril in the Alenquer region of Portugal, and after graduating from karting he went into Portuguese Formula Ford and won the title at the first attempt, aged just 17. He then moved into Formula Opel Lotus, which he took until his second year to win. His manager then suggested a move to Germany, and he signed up for Willy Weber's F3 team, which was backed by Opel, and he proceeded to absolutely dominate the 1992 championship, taking 11 wins from 26 races, plus 7 further podium places, to handily beat more experienced teammate Marco Werner for the title. A good showing at Macau, where he came second to veteran Ricard Riddell, earned him a seat in the Italian Krypton team in International F3000, and was, at the time of the Italian Grand Prix, battling for the title with Dams's Olivier Panis. Car 15, Marco Apicella. Bolognese native Apicella made his F3 debut back in 1984 at the age of 19, coming straight from karting, scoring his first wins and coming second in the standings in 1985 for the Copacchini team, which got him a seat at the better-funded Coloni team and finished runner-up in 1986 to teammate Nicola Larini. F3000 beckoned, but it was not to be a happy hunting ground for Marco, managing just 1 point in his 1987 rookie season with the underfunded Euro Venturini team. 3 years at First Racing followed, yielding 8 podiums but no wins, followed by a year as Paul Stewart's teammate at his own team, again 2 second places but no wins. Feeling like he was getting nowhere fast, and holding the unwanted record of the most F3000 races without a win, he decided to try his luck in Japan, signing for the Dome team, and winning at Autopolis in his 5th race. Another win at Sugo in early August had put him comfortably in the top 6 overall, and at the time of the Italian Grand Prix he's still in the hunt for the title. Monza may be his F1 race debut, but he has already got several tests under his belt, for Minardi in 1987, and later in the year in a specially built Reynard Mugen prototype as the Bridgestone tyre firm started to consider entering F1. There was other definite news for 1994, as Minardi and Scuderia Italia formally announced that they would merge, a deal brokered by CSAI, the governing body of Italian motorsport, which was fed up of seeing small Italian teams flounder and fail. Coloni and the Ozella/Von Metal team had both been decried by the Italian press as proof of CSAI's incompetence. So for 1994, Minardi Scuderia Italia would run cars built at Giancarlo Minardi's factory in Faenza, so Minardi would still be the constructor, while Beppe Lucchini brought his business acumen and steel money to the party. The team would miss the 2 flyaway races at the end of the year to give them more time for an internal restructuring and to prepare for 1994, which meant that the field would be down to 24, though there were suggestions that some teams could run a 3rd car at those races to evaluate potential future drivers. Eric Bernard for Ligier, Luca Badoer for Benetton, an unnamed Japanese driver in a Tyrrell, and somebody trying out the McLaren Lamborghini were all reported. Eric Broadley, meanwhile, said it wasn't his chassis' fault the cars had underperformed and blamed the Ferrari V12 engines, before saying that Lola would enter as a constructor in its own right for 1994, though no further details were forthcoming. Benetton had a new title sponsor to announce in the wake of Camel's departure from F1 from Japan Tobacco, who were already in F1 under their Cabin brand as sponsors of Ukio Katayama, but were now splashing the big bucks to plaster their most popular brand, Mild 7, on the Benettons. Sauber had the updated version of the Ilmor V10, still badged as a Sauber, which they'd been looking forward to for a while, and also announced the signing of André de Cortans, formerly of Peugeot Sport, as technical director. And finally, behind-the-scenes negotiations continued to drag on between Max Mosley and Frank Williams and Ron Dennis, both of whom had new technical gizmos in the works that the current draft of the regs didn't specifically outlaw. Williams had something called a continuously variable transmission, CVT, which essentially provided an infinite number of gears by changing the size of the various parts on the fly, while McLaren were talking about something called assisted suspension, which was apparently different from active suspension and therefore not banned. With all that done, it was time to go racing. Jean Alesi was even more fired up than usual. After his withdrawal in Belgium, the Italian press and Tifosi had been viciously attacking him and Jean Todt, accusing the driver of cowardice and the manager of being a doormat. Alesi had taken to the track at Fiorano alongside Nicola Larini to test a new aerodynamic package by Jean-Claude Migeot, with Berger putting in some laps too, but still suffering with his elbow. Ultimately, the F93B was deemed not quite suitable for Monza, so the F93A, with reinforced rear suspension and the new 4-valve V12 in the back, would be used there. The weather was changeable on Friday and Saturday, wet for Friday morning's warm-up, dry for qualifying, and by the time the second qualifying session began on Saturday afternoon, the morning's rain was still not quite dry in the high-speed Lesmos, so things were quiet to start with as everyone waited for it to dry properly. The Ferraris had done well in all the sessions so far, and indeed Alesi had split the Williamses in Saturday's wet warm-up, so despite the indifferent weather and Ferrari's disappointing season so far, the stands were looking pretty full. And they all waited patiently for something to happen as the teams looked at the sky, looked at the forecast and chatted in the pit lane. Finally, nearly 15 minutes into the hour-long session, Marco Apicella ventured out in need of getting some more laps under his belt after only managing a lap and a half before spinning out on Friday. After Marco had successfully negotiated a few laps, Katayama and Berger went out, but the Austrian was straight back in without crossing the line, so it was back to waiting. Eventually, though, Hill went out, beat Prost's time from Friday, and the floodgates opened with half the session gone. Half an hour later, Prost had retaken pole position, with Hill 3/10 behind in second, and Jean Alesi just 5/10 behind Damon in an excellent third, with Senna beating Schumacher to fourth, and a still not entirely fit Berger sixth. Herbert was a great 7th, alongside another great performance from Aguri Suzuki, 8th, and 3 places ahead of his more experienced teammate Warwick. Andretti was 9th, Patrese 10th, then the Ligiers 12th and 14th, finding insufficient grip, and the Saubers 13th and 15th, going fast but with some technical gribbles. The Tyrrells were doing well for a change, but the Jordans were having a shocker with a series of electrical problems for Barrichello. The Scuderia Italia team had done a lot of testing at Monza, meaning Alboreto managed to start 21st, his best all year, and Badoer might have done better if he hadn't broken his suspension, while the Minardis were suffering from a simple lack of oomph in their customer Ford V8s. The two debutants were both having a sharp learning curve in both setting up and qualifying an F1 car, and they ended up 23rd Apicella and 26th and last Lamy. As the session ended, Alesi was cruising back to the pits waving to the fans when Berger, who hadn't seen the checkered flag and pitboards, came charging up on a hot lap. Alesi's attempt to get out of the way backfired and Berger was sent spearing into the barriers at north of 200 miles an hour, 300 kph, shot across Alesi's bows, bounced and hit the opposite barriers at a fair clip, scaring the bejesus out of some poor photographer in the process. Alesi, absolutely beside himself, headed back to the pits, while Berger was carefully extracted from his car, dazed but amazingly unhurt, and packed off to the circuit's medical centre just in case. Jean was there to meet Gerhard when he was released, and the two men hugged it out. After some initial caginess, they'd actually become firm friends. Gerhard's mood was soured a little, though, when he was given a severe reprimand for carelessness, and no doubt his mechanics wouldn't thank him for the all-nighter they were about to pull, but all was more or less well. Race day dawned sunny, and 90,000 headed to Monza for race day. Not quite up to the levels of the glory years of the 70s and 80s yet, but a definite improvement. Leto stalled as they headed off for the parade lap and got going to start at the back. They wove around the circuit, warming up brakes and tyres, and then it was go time. To the cheers of the crowd, Alesi got ahead of Hill as they blasted down towards the Rettifilo, and then 3 separate accidents all happened together. Senna and Hill touched, sending Senna bouncing into the air and across the grass and slowing Hill down. Further back, a charging Leto hit Apicella, who bounced into Barrichello, also involving Alio and Fittipaldi, and as they were exiting Rettifilo, the two footworks collided and both went off. All of which left Prost in the lead, followed by Alesi, then Schumacher, Berger, Herbert, Brundle, Patrese, Andretti, Hill and Senna. Fittipaldi and Alio headed in for repairs, but both footworks, both Jordans and Leto were out, Marco Apicella having not even managed to negotiate one corner on his debut. The yellows were, needless to say, still out when the leaders came back round to start lap 2, but Prost was already leaving Alesi behind, with Schumacher tucked right up under his rear wing. Hill passed Andretti off camera, and Michael responded by spinning, then coming in for new boots and clean radiators, and rejoining 19th. Hill also passed Patrese, and when they next came past the cameras, the Italian had Senna hopping around behind him too. Clearly, neither car was too discombobulated by their earlier clash. On lap 4, Schumacher hung it all out and went round the outside of Alesi at Ascari and immediately shot off in pursuit of Prost. Hill was by now 7th and lapping faster than everyone except his teammate, and soon disposed of Brundle to get back into the points and was bearing down on Herbert's Lotus, which he passed on the start-finish straight. As Hill chased down Berger, Senna was having a little more problem getting past Brundle with that powerful Renault V10 in the back, and Damon was able to power up to the Austrian, sold him a dummy, and dove inside at the Parabolica to take 4th. Meanwhile, Senna was still behind Brundle, with both Herbert and Berger just ahead of him too, as Hill and Prost started trading fastest laps. On lap 9, Senna got into Brundle's slipstream to overtake, only to miss his braking, run straight into the back of the Ligier, and eliminate both cars. Prost now needed only 3 points from this race to be crowned champion, unless Hill won. Whether that was on Damon's mind or not, he'd clearly been taking the same brand of brave pills as Schumacher, and got through into 3rd at Rettifilo, and set off in pursuit of the German, while Prost was lapping Andretti, now up to 17th after Senna and Brundle's retirements. By now Prost was leading Schumacher by about 6 seconds, with Hill another 10 or so back and gaining slowly. Herbert passed Berger for 4th, but got it all wrong at the Parabolica and demolished his Lotus in the tyre wall. Berger, for his part, was dropping back with vibrations and came in to see if new boots would help, returning 8th, which put Wendlinger and Blundell up ahead of him. Prost was lapping faster and faster, stretching his gap to Schumacher out to 7.5 seconds, while Berger, still feeling the vibrations, came back in to retire. On further investigation, there was a broken sensor on his rear active suspension which was causing it to misbehave, so it probably was just as well that he pulled out before something broke at 200 miles an hour. Prost's progress had been stymied by Katayama and Martini, both going really well and scrapping over 8th behind Wendlinger, who'd also stopped for tyres, but he got past on lap 18 and continued on his way, now 8.3 seconds ahead of Schumacher, while Martini finally nipped ahead of Katayama at the Ascari as Schumacher approached to lap them. So the top 10 were now Prost, Schumacher, Hill, Alesi, Patrese and Brundle in the points, then Wendlinger, Martini, Katayama and Alboreto, the Lolas also going really well. Comas was 11th, and coming up quickly behind on a charge mostly off-camera was Michael Andretti, now 12th. As Murray Walker on the BBC commentary was commiserating with Martin Brundle, the other Ligier suffered a sudden understeer on cold tyres at the exit of the Parabolica and clobbered the barrier with its left rear tyre. Mark kept it on the road, but the suspension was thoroughly broken and all he could do really was shepherd it safely off the track. While all that was still being digested, it was Schumacher's turn to pull over, his Ford V8 having gone bang at the Curva Grande. Alesi meanwhile dove into the pits at the same time and rejoined third. So as the stewards waved the stripy flags because Schumacher had dumped oil all over the track, Prost, still setting fastest laps, was nearly 19 seconds ahead of Hill with Alesi over 30 seconds behind him, Patrese 4th a few seconds behind Alesi, Wendlinger 5th, Martini 6th, Katayama 7th, Alboreto now up to 8th, then Comas and Lamy, while Andretti was recovering after his own tyre stop. It was approaching half distance by now, so anyone who was going to make a single stop would be doing so shortly. Patrese came in on lap 25 of the 53, a good stop putting him back out still in 4th, followed by Prost, whose slower stop put him out just ahead of Hill. No danger for Prost though, because Damon was in next time around. With the Italian director naturally watching Alesi when nothing else interesting was happening, and sometimes when it was, viewers did get a brief glimpse of Andretti having made his way up to 8th past Lamy, having a much better debut than poor Apicella, with Luca Badoer mounting a spirited defence of 9th against Fittipaldi as the number 27 Ferrari made its way past a lot of them. Unseen, Badoer's teammate Alboreto had dropped out from 8th with a rear suspension problem. Martini and Badoer were still scrapping when Hill came past them 7 laps later, on a charge and setting a series of fastest laps as he started taking lumps out of Prost's lead, getting the lead from 15.6 seconds down to 9.1 in 5 laps. That was lap 40, with 13 to go. Alesi still held a distant third, Patrese 4th, Wendlinger 5th, and Andretti was now up into 6th, followed by Martini, Comas, and the Lamy-Badoer-Fittipaldi train. Katayama had also disappeared from the reckoning, both Tyrrells suffering from active suspension problems and had been in and out of the pits several times. Patrese pitted for a second time on lap 42, getting out still in 4th, while 5th-placed man Karl Wendlinger earned himself an Alesi fist shake for being uncooperative. If Patrese had planned on making a late charge though, he was disappointed, as his front active suspension was starting to sag, not enough to put him out, but he was slowed up enough that Wendlinger was able to come right up behind. Prost lapped Badoer and Fittipaldi again, still going at it hammer and tongs, and by now Damon was not far behind at all, sitting another fastest lap. There was a tense moment, but he lapped the pair cleanly and crossed the line just 3 seconds after Prost. It was looking like it might be a tight race for the win after all. Patrese had given way to Wendlinger, and Andretti soon followed through, dropping Ricciardo down to 6th. Andretti and Wendlinger had had a few on-track incidents early in the season, but hadn't seen much of each other recently. There was a little tension as he approached to overtake, but he was easily having the best race of his F1 career and just drove inside the Austrian at the Parabolica to take 4th on lap 45 with 8 to go. If his car kept going and he didn't do anything silly, this would be his best finish of the year, which was ironic given his decision before the race to quit. Next time round, Fittipaldi finally got past Badoer, but the cameras were watching the leaders as Hill had closed right up on Prost, but his team said they were reading excessive engine temperatures and advised Damon to back off. They should have told Prost, because 4 laps from the end a plume of white smoke issued from the back of Williams number 2, and he toured round dribbling oil everywhere before finally pulling off, letting Hill charge through into the lead and, with a big cheer from the Ferrari fans, Alesi into second. So with Hill having a minute's lead over Alesi, as long as his car didn't break again, he'd have his third win on the trot, with Michael Andretti now promoted to third and likewise hoping his luck would hold out just this once. Pedro Lamy's didn't, his engine giving out with just a lap and a half to go, but Hill came home to be the first driver to win his first 3 Grand Prix all in a row. Alesi took Ferrari's best finish of the year to the delirium of the fans, Andretti took his first ever F1 podium, Wendlinger a solid 4th, his best finish of the year. Patrese nursed his car home for 5th, and Eric Comas took his first point of the year in 6th. The two Minardis, meanwhile, had ended up running together in 7th and 8th, and as they raced for the line, Martini slowed and... "Oh,
ze rijden gewoon tegen elkaar aan. Goedemorgen zeg hé. Holy mikmak, die hadden we even gemist. Een absolute salto van Christian Fittipaldi.
Olaf Mol's Dutch commentary needs no translation here. If it had only happened a few seconds later, Fittipaldi might have the dubious distinction of finishing a Grand Prix going backwards mid-air and upside down. As it was, momentum carried him across the line on 3 wheels before he ground to a halt and got out, shaken but unhurt. The post-race meeting in the Minardi garage would not be a happy one, and it was a good job it happened at Monza where the start-finish straight is really wide, because at many narrower tracks Fittipaldi might have landed in the pit lane. Fortunately, no harm had been done, except to Minardi's already thin bottom line. With that last bit of drama over, Alesi made his way back into the pits, steering with his knees as he waved with one hand and brandished a Ferrari flag with the other, and the crowd broke ranks and mobbed the start-finish straight as usual, though they did make way for the recovery truck carrying the shattered number 23 Minardi away. The crowd drowned out God Save the Queen, while Michael Andretti stood there looking as if he could hardly believe it himself. So, Alain Prost would have to wait at least until the Portuguese Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time, as Hill moved into second place and was still in with at least a mathematical chance of the title, 23 points behind with 3 races to go. He sympathised with Prost afterwards as the Renault technicians tried to work out why Prost telemetry hadn't indicated anything wrong, but Damon must have been thinking about his 2 retirements in the lead earlier in the year and taking a certain amount of satisfaction from it working out for him for once. Andretti was non-committal when asked about how the result would affect his prognosis for 1994, but of course he already knew what the reporters didn't, and a few days after the race signed a contract with Chip Ganassi to return to Indy racing for 1994.